e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop b5, a6, bishop a4, knight f6, castle kingside, bishop e7, d3, b5, bishop b3, d6, a3, castle kingside, knight c3, rook b8, knight d5, knight takes d5, bishop takes d5, bishop d7, b4, bishop f6, bishop e3, knight e7, bishop b3, knight g6, c3, a5, b takes a5, rook a8, a4, b takes a4, bishop takes a4, rook takes a5, bishop takes d7, rook takes a1, queen takes a1, queen takes d7, rook b1, queen c6, knight d2, rook a8, queen b2, knight f8, d4, e takes d4, c takes d4, h6, queen b3, queen a4, queen takes a4, rook takes a4, d5, bishop d4, bishop takes d4, rook takes d4, rook b2, f5, f3, f takes e4, f takes e4, knight d7, king f2, knight c5, king e3, rook d3, check, king e2, rook d4, king e3, rook d3, check, king e2, rook c3, rook b8, check, king f7, rook c8, knight d7, knight f3, knight f6, knight d2, king g6, g3, king h5, e5, knight takes d5, e takes d6, c takes d6, rook d8, rook e3, check, king f2, rook e6, knight c4, knight f6, king f3, d5, knight e3, rook e5, King f4. Rook e4 check. King f3. Rook d4. Knight f5. Rook d3 check. King e2. Rook a3. Knight takes g7 check. King g6. Knight e6. Rook a2 check. King f3. Rook takes h2. Knight f4 check. King f7. Knight takes d5. Rook d2. Rook h8. Rook takes d5. Rook takes h6. King e6. Rook h4. Rook d3 check. King e2. Rook takes g3. Rook a4. Knight d5. Rook a8. King e5. Rook e8 check. King d4. Rook d8. Rook e3 check. King f2. Rook e5. Rook a8. King d3. Rook a3 check. Knight c3. King f3. Rook f5 check. King g4. Rook f8. Rook a7. Knight b5. Rook d7 check. Knight d4. Rook e7. Knight f5. Rook a7. Knight e3 check. King g3. Knight f5 check. King f4. Knight d4 check. King g3. Knight c6. Rook a4. Knight e5. Rook a3 check. King e4. Rook a4 check. King e3. Rook a3 check. Knight d3. King g4. Rook f1. King g5. King e4. Rook a4 check. King d5. Rook a5 check. Knight c5. King g4. King d4. Rook a8. Knight e6. Rook a4 check. King e5. Rook a5 check. King e4. Rook a4 check. Knight d4. King g5. Rook f5 check. King g6. Rook e5. King f6. Rook d5. King g6. King f4. King f6. Rook d7. Rook a6. Rook h7. Rook a4. Rook h6, check. King e7. King e4. Rook a1. Knight c6, check. King f7. Knight e5, check. King e7. Knight d3. King f7. King f5. King e7. Rook e6, check. King d7. Knight e5, check. King c7. Rook e6. King takes e6. King e4. Rook a4, check. King d5. Rook h4. Knight c4, check. King c7. Knight e5. Rook h5. King d4. King d6. Knight c4, check. King e6. Knight e3. Rook h4, check. King d3. King e5. Knight c4, check. King d5. Knight e3, check. King c5. Knight c2. Rook a4. Knight e3. Rook d4, check. King c3. Rook d8. Knight c2. King d5. King d3. King e5, check. King e3. Rook c8. King d3. Rook d8, check. King e3. Rook h8. King d3. Rook h4. King c3. King d5. Knight e3, check. King e4. Knight c2. Rook h8. King d2. Rook h3. Knight e4. Rook e3. Knight c2. Rook d3, check. King e2. Rook h3. King d2. Rook e3. Knight e1. Rook a3. Knight c2. Rook d3, check. King e2. Rook d8. Knight e1. Rook h8. King d2. Rook h1. Knight c2. Rook h3. Knight e1. Rook g3. Knight c2. Rook d3, check.